Tan is my last name. So just call me Yenny. And I am the museum officer and curator of birds at the Chian Natural History Museum. The LKCNHM for short. Yeah. So today's topic that I'll be speaking about is natural history collections in an era of genomics, a bird's eye view of Singapore. As the title suggests, we are going to delve into the situation of collections in Singapore with the bearing in mind that collections and genomics go hand in hand very much. So I did my PhD in the US and I submitted my thesis in January. I'm still waiting to defend, but in the meantime, I'm working at the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum. But my background, my PhD, and my whole thesis is conducted under the tutelage of Dr. Frank Rind, who is the head of the Avian Evolution Lab at NUS. The Avian Evolution Lab is a very vibrant community, as you can see from our most recent lab photo of all of us at a barbecue. Yeah, and of course, we do a lot of science. Yeah, so in our lab, we do a lot of next generation sequencing. Where um, genomic work has used to be based on multi-locus data sets. Now we're able to do genome-wide sampling and or even whole genome resequencing, and that is what our lab focuses on. Yeah, in our lab, we do a variety of genomic research, but I'm just going to go into the research that I'm primarily involved in and also the research that our museum supports. One of the projects that we do in the Avian Evolution Lab is applying genomic methods to wildlife forensics. Using whole genome resequencing methods and also whole genome sampling methods, we are able to trace the genetic provenance of confiscated samples, such as in this case of the Swinhoe's white eye. So this is a RADseq dataset, so a reduced representation dataset of SNPs. And with this SNP dataset, we are able to identify that the confiscated Swinhoe white eye samples from Malaysia, they were confiscated at the border. And they were brought to our lab and we conducted this project. And we found that these birds were kind of pretty interesting because they showed that the trade routes into Singapore have somewhat shifted over the time. In the historical context, a lot of the songbird trade for the white eyes came from China. Uh, a lot of the birds that came over maybe about 30, 40, 50 years ago can be traced back to China, and because that was when the predominant trade routes were. And a lot of these birds escaped and populated the island, and also introgressed and mixed with the local individuals. The native subspecies in Singapore is the Winnie subspecies, and the because of this uh introgression throughout the generations due to the captive escapees, we have a lot. You can see that the birds today in Singapore Island, the main island of Singapore, is represented by a continuum of genomic fractions. So they are not pure per se. They're not purely Irwini, whereas the remaining Irwini actually exists on this island called Ubin. Yeah, so it's with whole genome sampling methods that we are able to elucidate this interesting pattern. And this was a paper that I had the honor of participating in. And also, when it comes to museum specimens, the Avian Evolution Lab also engages the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum for our repository of specimens to conduct taxonomic research. So one example is the dark-throated oriole that was conducted by Frank and my colleagues. Using the museum specimens, they were able to identify and describe a not describe by diagnose a new subspecies, an eastern population of the dark-throated oriole. Using museum specimens, they were able to do morphometric measurements and also some statistical analysis to diagnose this new taxa. Yeah, so you can see that these are all specimens that were contributed by our museum. We often allow scientists, not just the scientists from NUS, but also scientists from abroad to come and access our repositories whenever needed. So besides besides just morphometric analysis, we are also able to contribute to museomics. Museomics is the practice of getting genetic data from specimens in museums, and usually in our field of in our field of conservation genomics in birds, we term these specimens that are these skin specimens as historic specimens. I know that historic DNA has very different meanings in different taxa. So like in humans, historic DNA may come from millions of years ago, but for uh, animals like birds, historic DNA is the term historic DNA is used for any DNA that is derived from skin specimens in museums. They're held in museum storage. Yeah, so with again, this is another study that was based on specimens in the Li Chian. And my colleague Meng Ye Wu, who goes by the name Melody, who's in the audience here today. Hi, Melody. She managed to write this really interesting and cool paper about the a distinct new subspecies of the white ram shama. And the new taxa is the one with the longer tail, and it's now called the Langkawi shama, and it's presumably very endangered at this moment. And not only were we able to do that previous study with mitochondrial DNA, we were also able to extract whole genomes from the towpad samples that you get from a museum. And Melody was again able to conduct this very cool piece of work. With whole genomes, she uncovered cryptic diversity and also interesting introgressive patterns throughout the entire white ram shama complex, and also helped to establish that these birds, although they are considered least concern as a when it comes to conservation, actually a lot of these taxa are fast going extinct. Yeah, and she did this really cool analysis about the runs of homozygosity. So these are sections of the DNA of the genome that are homozygous. So you can think of them, you can think of them a little bit in principle like linkage blocks. So the longer the runs of homozygosity, the more inbreeding per se. So like the less diversity there is. So on panel B, you can see that the present white ram shama taxa are highly homozygous compared to the ones in the past. And this was established again, a comparison established, anchored by museum samples and specimens from our museum. Yeah, and again, Melody did a lot of these museomics, of course, so you will see that she's first author on most of these papers. She was also able to apply these concepts to a local context. So this paper was about Singapore's chickens. So chickens, as we know them, in Singapore, we have a native chicken species called the red jungle fowl, Gallus gallus. And using historic samples versus contemporary samples, Melody was able to identify that actually Singapore's jungle fowl that are running amok around the island are not that pure. And a lot of them are actually represented by a continuum, again, of genomic ancestry fractions. And Melody again was able to use the same samples and also add more specimens to her data set to do a very cool domestic chicken project on the entire almost a continental Southeast Asia. Sorry. And she found that the deepest genomic divergence was between the wild red jungle fowl and the domestic jungle fowl. And that was really cool because it means that the wild red jungle fowl actually is being genetically eroded due to rampant introgression throughout the Anthropocene. Yeah, and that's Melody. So these are all her very interesting work. And if you have more questions, you can always approach Melody. She'll be more than happy to explain and tell you all about chickens and shamas. So now I'm going to go into a history of the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum. So our museum has a prehistoric past. As a British colonial, as a British colony in the past, a lot of things were named after Sir Stamford Raffles, who is arguably the founding father of modern day Singapore. And the museum had many names. First, it was called the Raffles Museum, and then it was called the National Museum before finally it was named the Lee Kong Chian. We were officially opened on the 18th of April 2015. So we just had our birthday last month, and it will be our 10th anniversary next year. So when it comes to scientific collections, our collections is called the Zoological Reference Collection. It was first started by Sir Nicholas Belfield Dennis in 1877. So it's a pretty old collection, and Sir Nicholas was able to serve a bit like the first curator, and then there were many other curators who were mostly from the colonial powers. And the museum then shifted locations from the Raffles Library, which is now known as the National Museum, to the Singapore Science Centre, where it was housed for a while. But because the Singapore Science Centre has a very strong focus on education and outreach, the scientific reference collections were somewhat neglected because they were mostly interested in the taxidermy, the mounted specimens, but the scientific reference collections were slighted in a way, and they were kind of homeless for a while, and then they were given to the university, and then the university at the time was very small, and we have two campuses today, but at the time there was only one campus, if I'm not wrong, or we had very limited facilities. So the the ZRC, the reference collection, was shuttled between locations very frequently, and during this time, it was only held in cold storage and non-air conditioned. So air conditioning only came in when it was moved to its permanent home now in the National University of Singapore. In the photo, you can see that you will see the old building that the museum used to be housed in until 2015. So this is in the science faculty, and at the time there was already air conditioning, but um, we didn't have air conditioning until quite recently, like in 1972. Until 1972, these uh, these skin specimens, all the biological specimens were all, uh, they survived the war and they will survive lots of transfer here, there, everywhere. So a lot of these specimens became damaged, but also a lot of them survived. So right now there's 566,500 lots. I think there's more now. This was from 2010. And as the curator of birds, I'm concerned with this little fraction here, the 31,000. The last I checked our catalog, we have about 34,000 specimens with a little over 1,000 species and counting because as we know, natural history collections don't really stop. It's always a work in progress, and we always try to collect and to preserve and to document our natural world around us. So I'm just going to touch briefly on the importance of natural history collections. So when we build natural history collections, we build with future in mind actually. So we want it to be reference material for now, later, and hopefully forever. So when we store these specimens, we often store them like that in a non-mounted position. In museums, when you see the birds posed in lifelike poses, it's actually called taxidermy. But specimen preparation is not the same as taxidermy. Specimen preparation is preparing specimens with storage in mind, actually. So birds are often in this, they're preserved in this position in the interest of space economy. Yeah. And of course, these natural history collections serve as timeless repositories. I had the fortune of visiting some of my collaborators in the Berg in Seattle, and also the Cornell University Museum of Vertebrates. And so these are some photos of what I saw in their collections, which was pretty amazing. So they have some really cool things like the Eskimo curlew, which is probably a bird that's extinct in the wild right now. And this bird, I remember, was collected. It wasn't collected; it was purchased in a market in Chicago. So we can see that um, if this bird wasn't procured by the museum, then it presumably would be living in someone's private collections or even worse, destroyed. So it's a pretty precious specimen to have and a pretty valuable reference material to refer to. So I'm just going to segue a bit over here. On the tag of the little curlew on the top, there are some Chinese words. And these Chinese words say number 10, something like number 10. And then the second line reads long mouth, suck, suck. Because the people, whoever collected it, presumably was Chinese and didn't know very much about the biology of this bird. They assumed that the bird with its long bill had a feeding strategy that involved suction, which is we know that is erroneous. So it's I thought it was really interesting when I went through the collections and to see all these um how do you say like misconceptions, and sometimes it's just interesting and really makes you think like, wow, that's how much science has evolved and how much our understanding has improved over the times, and these documentations are pretty important, and they serve to as a bit like a snapshot in time of how people's understandings were in the past. Yeah, and besides the Eskimo curlew, of course, there's a famous example of extinction, the passenger pigeon. This was in Cornell, and the ivory-billed woodpecker, which arguably people can is a very contentious thing whether or not it's right now extinct. So anyway, museums serve as timeless repositories for these birds that are extinct or are fast going extinct, without which we would not have future generations wouldn't have in a way to remember them. And also in Singapore, we have as a small island that's highly urbanized, we get uh, a lot of birds that are actually extirpated from the island. So these are two broadbills that used to breed in Singapore, but they no longer do. The one on top on the top row is the green broadbill, and then the one below is the black and red broadbill. So whenever these birds appear on the island today, they are considered vagrants. They are no longer breeding on the island because of extensive development of the island. Yeah, and these are birds, these are specimens that are in our holding and serve as a reminder of what birds used to live here. Yeah, and also, of course, collecting specimens is important because you get to document things that would otherwise go unnoticed. So I would like to give you about 10 seconds or less to examine this specimen, this photo, and think about what's unusual about this bird. This is a blue crown hanging parrot, small little parrot. Do you spot it? So this blue crown hanging parrot was collected a few years ago, was in our freezer backlog for a long time. And then some people came from, I had some collaborators from Yale University about a month ago, and we were processing this bird, and they said, hey, this is really cool. So what's cool about it? This bird has 5 toes on each foot. Birds usually have 4 toes. And in the blue crown hanging parrot, it's in a zygodactyl arrangement, two in front, two behind. But this one has a really freakish arrangement. I mean, I get goosebumps looking at it. So it almost looks like a human hand, but the so-called thumb, the digit, is actually backwards. It's face backwards. So this was a really unusual find, and it's kind of unfortunate that we don't have a photo or media of it live, because it would be very interesting to see how the foot functioned on a live bird. But nevertheless, it's a really important specimen because without which we would not have been able to document this incidence of polydactyly in the blue crown hanging parrot. So in our museum, we do have a series of blue crown hanging parrots, and I'm hoping to compare this specimen to our holdings and maybe study a bit more about the functional morphology of this bird. So that's a cool find that we had recently, and also goes to show how important it is to pay attention to specimens and to collect. And of course, when you build a natural history collections, you build with research in mind. That is the approach that our museum, the Lee Kong Chian Natural History Museum, we go with. We want to build a coherent and a relevant collection. So these are photos of the most impressive spread wing collections I've ever seen. This is in the book, and they have, I think, the biggest spread wing collection in the world. And with spread wings, you can do so much. You can study mold, you can study patterns of mold. You can study wing area and things like that. Things that would not be able that you can't analyze if you don't have a spread wing. Because as with the photos before, you saw that birds are typically preserved to conserve space, and they are conserved in that posture. And if they are, when once birds are dry, when the skins are dry, they can't be relaxed anymore. They are kind of frozen in time, in a way. So whenever we prepare specimens, nowadays, whenever I prepare specimens, I always prepare spread wing because I, uh, I drew inspiration from the birds collection, and I really, really want to build our museum's collections to inform future studies. And of course, if you want to build collections that are relevant, you have to think about what research needs are. So one thing, of course, is to collect spread wings because actually preparing spread wings is very simple compared to preparing a whole study specimen. And with it, you can do so much. So and there are also other preparation styles. So you can also do a wing specimen, a specimen with a spread wing. You can also do spread tails, but it all depends on what you want your collection to look like and what you want your collection, what purpose the collection serve the scientific community. So when I approach building the collections and leaving a legacy for Singapore's birds, I always think about these questions. And of course, I draw inspiration from these museums that I managed to visit. So this is a photo of the prep lab in the Cornell University Museum of Vertebrates. They also do a spread wing collection, and they also do this interesting passes prep. If you can see on the left, there's some that looks like some foot, thinned foot of a duck, I think. Yeah, so that's also a prep method that was special, and I've never seen it anywhere else. But in order for your collections to be coherent, you also can't just go around preparing any type of prep that you want. So it's no use having one spread wing of one bird of one species. It needs to be a series in order for it to be comparable and therefore coherent and also relevant to scientific research. So uh, whenever I try to whenever I collect birds or from our salvage program, which I'll talk about later, I always think about these approaches and how best to maximize the salvage specimens that we have. So, in spite of the importance of natural history collections, the growth of such collections are greatly on the decline, mostly because of the increased ethical considerations of active collecting, especially of higher vertebrates, the furry, the cute, the fluffy, such as birds. So, understandably, it has active collecting has dwindled in the recent decades as compared to the somewhat indiscriminate collecting efforts pre-World War II. So in the past, when you wanted to learn about a bird, you go out and you will shoot it and then collect the bird. But as we know, collecting cannot be indiscriminate. It has to be judicious. It has to be calculated. And whenever a bird is actively collected, the question in mind should be whether or not the individual is worth collecting. Is it worth collecting this one individual, or is it to the detriment of the species or the taxa um, for 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 its survival and existence? So, but and also without natural history collections, without the efforts of people before us, our predecessors, there would not have been um, collections that were coherent and able to tell us stories, such as the decrease in eggshell weight in birds of prey, which was the effect of DDT that was discovered by uh, through looking at eggshell thickness through time. And uh, this was somewhat a seminal paper about museum collections and how they can contribute to effective time series to study these long-term phenomena. And now in a time and day of climate change, of course, this has become more important to establish sensible time series and robust time series to study how animals and plants react to climate change throughout time, and so that we can predict and project the effects in the future and design effective conservation methods. So in Singapore, we can't collect actively, also because Singapore is really small and we don't have many endemics. I don't think we have any avian endemics. So and we are already so developed, and a lot of our natural habitats are fragmented. So it doesn't really make sense to do active collecting in Singapore because there's nothing new to document. There's no new taxa to discover or to assign types to. So what we do in Singapore is to do carcass salvage. So that's the main way that I've been doing to. That's the main method of growing the collections that I've been doing for the past few years, even before I started my position as at a museum. So Singapore is a big city. It's a city state. The entire island is a city. And we lie in the middle of the East Asian Australasian flyway, where birds migrate. It's like a highway for birds migrating. And when birds pass through Singapore annually, thousands of them die every year due to collision to urban structures. And just because whenever you have a building, you have the risk of collision. There's no way around that. And so the matter of fact is that birds will continue to die, and we can do mitigation measures. We can put stickers, we can put decals on buildings, but like I said, as long as you have a building, there's a risk, and there's only so much we can do, and birds will continue to die. And the best way forward is to salvage them for science. And this project is we collaborated with several institutions. One of them is Cornell, and we managed to make this into a funded project, which was great. And of course, salvage is a multi-step process. The first step is to find the bird. So in a big city like Singapore, we rely very much on the eyes of the public to report to us birds that they find, and then we will arrange for people to go down and collect it. Oftentimes it's me. I collect the birds myself. So collecting the bird is the first step. Securing the bird is the first step, followed by processing, so measurements of biometrics before the bird goes into the freezer for quarantine, and then the actual preparation of the skin, the bird specimen. So we usually take tissue for DNA for long-term storage, and we also take various tissue types depending on research projects needs. And then we try to do a skin. And this is a very laborious process that involves many steps and also a lot of practice, as Yifan will tell you, because she's gone through it with me also. And but all in all, we collect birds with the vision to preserve them for science. So this is what's necessary. So in our museum, we prepare dry round skins, and we have also started to prepare spread wings, and also various kinds of specimens that researchers may require. So I also preserve some partial skulls for whenever the bird is too far decomposed for skin, then I try to salvage whatever I can from the bird. It can be uh, parts of the skeleton, it can be parts of the wing, whatever it is, we try our best to make the best out of the specimen that we get. So before I was curator, it was really a trial and error thing because there was no one at the museum who could instruct me how to prepare these specimens. So I resorted to things like YouTube and online resources, which came with a lot of trial and error. So maybe 3 years ago, you would see that these bird parts were drying on my balcony. If you were my neighbor, maybe you'd be very concerned, but thankfully my neighbors were very kind to me. And also I started out actually with making skull specimens. So just allowing the skulls to macerate in cold water and then just rinsing off whatever gunk there is and then trying my best to glue them together. So in a way, I learned a lot about birds doing this carcass salvage than I would in a classroom or without practical experience. And it's well worth it because uh, we managed to get the first specimen of the Eurasian sparrowhawk in Singapore. I know that this is not a special bird for people in Europe. This is like one of the most common accipiters. But in Singapore, when the Eurasian sparrowhawk appears, it's considered a mega in birding terms. So for one to be found by a member of the public who kindly reported it to us, and for us to procure such a specimen is really a big event when it comes to natural history collections. So I remember going down for this bird and collecting it and thinking, this Japanese sparrowhawk looks really big because I've not seen a Eurasian sparrowhawk live. This was the sixth record in Singapore of its sighting. So uh, we thought it was unusual, but of course, my more well-informed colleagues told me, hey, actually, this is a Eurasian sparrowhawk. This is like the first specimen for Singapore ever. And we wrote a little paper about it, and now it's drying up nicely in the museum. And we are very happy that we managed to secure it. Besides collecting the birds themselves, I also collect the metadata associated with these finds as a long-term database for mortality events in Singapore. So as of today, we are at about 921 records of out of about 4 years of effort, 4 or 5 years of effort. And we try our best to document every single report that comes in. So we do date, locality, sometimes time or find if possible, and whether or not the bird was collected. So the collage on the right is just uh, it's a compilation of what we got last month, just from last month. So that's a white-breasted waterhen, and clockwise there's a house crow, and then a red-legged crake, a juvenile, and lastly there's a northern boobook, a nighttime migrant. So just some shameless publicity here for people watching in Singapore. If you find a dead bird, please report it to us. That's our WhatsApp and Telegram hotline. It's manned by yours truly and my colleagues. So whenever you find a bird, please report it to us. Send us some photos. If you don't know why it is, we can help you identify it, and we will do our best to collect the bird if it's of scientific interest. We generally don't collect feral birds because, like the Java miner and the what's that? The rock dove, because we have a lot of them, but I would never, personally, I would never pass up any good specimen in good condition. So report the bird to us. Even if we don't collect the bird in the end, your report is valuable to our database, and we appreciate every report that comes to us. And this project, of course, is not without its challenges and caveats. As an opportunistic project, many of these incidents go unreported, such as going through different channels. So, like I mentioned on the previous slide, we have a hotline, and the hotline is run on two messaging channels, so the WhatsApp and Telegram, and it takes quite a lot more time to monitor other social media channels. So many times we find these reports, such as the crested goshawk on the left and the oriental honey buzzard on the right, which are posted on Facebook and never make it to our hotline. So of course, this is just a small, tiny fraction of what goes unreported, but such is the feature of such an opportunistic project that you will have a high incidence of underreporting. And also because we rely on the eyes of the public, there's a strong reporting bias that favors colorful, attractive, and bigger birds. On the left panel, you will see our champion crashes. So these are the birds that are most commonly reported to our hotline. The blue-winged pitta is especially well represented in our data set because most times when people see a bird this colorful lying on the floor, it evokes a strong sentiment that they want to help the bird, or they don't want the bird to go to waste. So many times when people report the blue-winged pitta, they tell me, "Hey, this I found this really colorful bird. Please take it so that it can go to science, so that it can help your research. We hope that it can help your research." And unfortunately, this same feeling, this same sentiment is not kept for birds that are more drab or less colorful, such as the Java miner, or or even those, or even the Phylloscopus warblers that come through Singapore, like the Arctic warbler, Eastern crown warbler, or all these warblers. They are highly underrepresented in our data set, and it just goes to show that it's again another feature of an opportunistic data set that relies on detection by members of the public. And oftentimes it's also a morbid treasure hunt. So these are three incidences that of a collection of a salvage that remain very fresh in my memory. On the left, on the first panel on the left is a collared scops owl. It was reported on the first day of Lunar New Year, and I'm ethnically Chinese, so Lunar New Year is like Christmas. It's like a big thing for Chinese for in Chinese culture. So I was having a dinner with my family, and then I got a call on the hotline saying, "Hey, we found this scops owl." And there was a video of it. It was really fresh. I was like, I have to get it. So so I left my family dinner, said sorry, apologized to everyone, and said I'll be back, and went on a hunt for the bird because all I was sent was some photos and a rough locality of the bird. And I wasn't able to find the bird after for about 15 minutes, and it was raining. And I was trying to use the landmark in the background, which was the potato chip wrapper, the orange thing in the background. I couldn't find that wrapper. So I had to walk maybe 20 meters around that 20-meter stretch to find it. And thankfully, we managed to secure it. And it was in really good condition. It was a bit wet, but it's just moisture. You can dry it. Yeah. And then earlier this year, someone reported a northern bubuk. This it's a bit like it's like a nighttime uh migrant to Singapore. It was reported near a bus stop, and I reached the site within 20 minutes of the report, and the bird was gone. So I asked around the people who were walking, sitting at the bus stop. I just asked them, "Did you see a bird? It was right here." And they all said, "No, we didn't see it. Sorry." Until a cleaner, one of the cleaning workers, the sanitation workers, he came to me and said, "Hey, I found a dead bird." And then he showed me a zebra dove, which was also dead nearby. And I said, "No, no, no, not this one. This is the one I'm looking at." And I showed him the photo, and he was like, "Oh, I really haven't seen it." But he was really, I think I looked really desperate. Like I really wanted to find the bird. So I asked him, like, "Okay, do you know if your colleagues have been around and did they clear the bird?" So we went together to the nearest trash can and did a bit of digging, and lo and behold, it was right there in a plastic bag, nicely bagged up and disposed by, I believe, a well-meaning member of the public. So this is not the first time it has happened. Actually, oftentimes there it's a very it's a very common occurrence for me to reach the point, the site of the report, and the bird is gone, and it's usually because someone threw it away. Yeah, so we were lucky to be able to secure that one. That was a good specimen to have. And just one more account, which is of the Asian open bills about a few years ago. So Singaporean birders will remember that in December 2019, there was a huge eruption of Asian open bills. So there were hundreds of birds circling around the island, and it was a spectacle. It was reported on the Straits Times, the newspaper. And on a few months later, in March, someone reported an Asian open-bill carcass on the side of the road. So it must have been hit by a vehicle, and someone moved it to the side of the road on the pavement, the grass verge. So when we got there, we got the bird, and we were on our way back to the lab, and we found another one under the bush. So that was two open bills in a day, and we've not gotten another open bill since. So that was a pretty big find also. So it's sometimes, actually often, a morbid treasure hunt when it comes to salvage. And in Singapore, in hot, sunny, humid Singapore is always a race against time. When we collect birds, we want to collect them and maximize their use for their utility for research. And one of the main considerations is DNA. As a researcher from a with a genomics background, that is actually at the forefront of my mind. Like, how do we preserve the DNA quality of birds that we salvage? And there's nothing much you can do except to race against time, to collect the bird as soon as possible, because oftentimes uh, you're racing against the climate because the climate's so detrimental to DNA quality, and also people because people would move the carcasses, they may discard it, they may put it somewhere else, and some predator may get it. So these are three birds that uh, that unfortunately went uncollected. Oh, except the last one. But these were the first two birds, gray-rumped tree swift and Siberian thrush, were unfortunately they went uncollected because they were reported too late. And by the time I got to the location, cat had gotten the Siberian thrush. Yeah, so you always have to rush. And then the Eurasian sparrowhawk was also just in time because when I got to the bird, it was about to be picked up by a sanitation worker, so it was about to be thrown away. So if I were 5 minutes late, we would not have gotten that specimen. Yeah, and another thing that comes out of the salvage program is valuable is records of hard to detect species such as the slaty-legged crake and the northern boobook. These are birds that migrate at night, and they are very skulky. The crakes are very skulky birds. Rails are very skulky birds. They have a high incidence of under detection, and people usually there's a big birding community in Singapore, and whenever there's a report of, say, a northern boobook, people flock to go and see the bird. But little do most people know that the northern boobook is quite a common crash victim. So every year we get about 4 or 5 of them, which is pretty high considering how rare they are perceived to be. And one attribute that may have contributed to such under detection is really their nocturnal habits. So these are birds that fly at night. And oftentimes the birds that fly at night are the ones that crash because at night it's dark and Singapore is a big city, so there's a lot of artificial light which disorientates birds that migrate at night and causes them to fly into buildings that they don't mean to. So whenever we get these records, I submit them to the Singapore Birds Project, which is a publicly available database uh, for members of the public as a reference material. So I highly recommend that you visit the website. This is run by my colleagues at the lab. So we try our best to document the birds also, not just in in a physical specimen, but also digitally. And as a curator, I also strive to establish international network and collaboration. We generally try not to put all your eggs into one basket. What do I mean by that? What I mean is that uh, if we have, say, 10 specimens of blue-winged pittas, if I have, since there's surplus of blue-winged pittas, you would try to ship them to a second home so that in case something were to happen, something untoward were to happen to your collections, at least there's a backup somewhere. Because as a museum, you want one of the main missions of a museum is to document and to serve as a gallery of the dead for the living. So if we are able to, I always try to conduct exchange between institutions and to exchange material uh, so as to enhance the breadth of our collections and also somewhat to give an assurance to our collections that we have representation of Singapore's taxa, of Singapore's birds, Singapore specimens in other institutions abroad. So and I don't remember now, but I think it was 2 years ago when I sent this donation to the Natural History Museum in the UK. And as far as I know, they've managed to process most of them, and they are now available on GBIF for researchers worldwide to refer to. And I also recently collaborated with the Bird Museum and the Cornell University Museum of Vertebrates. We had a two-way exchange of people and specimens, and this is just a little selection of what we managed to send from Singapore. Yeah, so those are blue-winged pittas and some pink-necked green pigeons and a variety of birds and these are all birds that came from the salvage collection. There's no active collecting in Singapore. So the salvage program has been a very big success, I would say. And more recently, we had a team from Yale University come and visit us and took some skeletonized birds, some wings, and also some specimens back. And we brought them around for a little hike on the the highest elevation point in Singapore, which is the Bukit Timah summit. That stone tells you how high it is. We are not a very hilly nation. It's only 163 meters. high, and that's our highest point in Singapore. But we saw some cool birds on the way up. Yeah, and besides, and one last thing that I have been doing recently as a curator is to help document new mountain endemics. So, in the past, my colleague Movin has been doing his PhD on mountain endemics in the Philippines, and we've been lending our capacity to help conduct the fieldwork and to collect the birds with the relevant permits and reposit them at the National Museum of the Philippines. And that's something that we're still working with them very closely for. And happy to say that we've successfully managed to collect and preserve a lot of these new birds for their museum. You can see these are just some photos of the process. There's a lot of stories behind. There's many stories behind it. But basically, collecting specimens in the field is not easy, and you oftentimes have to resort to whatever you have on hand. So on the left, most photo, that's me working on I think that's a locust stella, grasshopper warbler with my first aid kit because I was caught off guard, uh, vastly underprepared. I've since learned from my mistake. And wrapping birds in a hotel room, making sure they dry in the right positions, and then yeah, learning from my mistakes and getting better. So we have a long-term collaboration with the National Museum of the Philippines, and we do hope that whatever we do will contribute greatly to the understanding of Philippine biodiversity. So with that, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you very much for attending, and thank you to these little birds for tolerating our handling and for contributing to our understanding of them. Thank you.